Neon rain hisses over Iron Harbor as a tired mechanic hears a cry that no human throat could make. A dragon mother is hiding in the shadows with two trembling hatchlings, and hungry eyes on the street are closing in. In 20 heartbeats, he must choose: walk away or change everything. Tonight, survival meets courage, and one open door could rewrite a city. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. Iron Harbor wore the night like a badge. Signs flickered and hummed, their glow sliding down rain-slick girders in bright streams that never quite reached the ground. The drops were more light than water, coated promises bouncing across steel walkways. Riven Halley pulled his hood tight and flexed his Mayo arm, the carbon tendons whispering as they settled. The shift at Kesh and Coil had been long, the kind of long that scrapes the edges off a person. He just wanted tea, silence, and a bed that didn't argue. The service alley by the coolant towers was usually his shortcut. Tonight, a sound stopped him, metal brushing concrete, followed by a soft chime, as if wind had found a set of tiny bells. Riven stilled. The city had 1,000 noises, and this was not one of them. He moved gently, palms open, every step placed like he was crossing glass. Behind two dented waste units, a dragon crouched close to the ground. Her scales were a dusky gold that swallowed the neon instead of throwing it back, and her wings pressed against her sides as if the night were trying to steal her heat. Two hatchlings clung to her, one with a bent tail tip, the other with a hairline crack on a little horn nub. The mother sorted through discarded meal boxes with precise care, choosing what looked least rough on a small stomach. The nearer hatchling whispered, voice light and bell-toned. "Mama, I'm still hungry." The mother nudged a box closer, speaking softly. "One bite at a time, little flame, and it will feel bigger." Riven had not meant to make a sound, but his Mayo arm's micro-servos clicked. 3 pairs of bright eyes turned toward him. The mother lifted herself, not tall, but steady, one wing half fanned to cover her young. "We take what is thrown away," she said, little breath frosting the cool air. "We harm no one." Riven raised both hands. "I'm no guard," he said. "Just a tired tech going home." He noticed the hatchling's thinness, the way they pressed to her for warmth their own bodies hadn't learned to hold. He had seen need before. It was a shape the world traced again and again. Voices drifted from the main deck, laughing, careless, the sort that turned mean when the neon broke. Riven glanced at the mouth of the alley, and then back at the family. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emberline," she answered, "and these are Pulse and Lilt." She said it with quiet pride, and it made something old ache in Riven's chest. "I'm Riven," he said. "I have a place. It's not much, but it's warm and has tea." He almost laughed at himself. Tea and warmth offered to strangers with wings? What kind of offer was that in a city like this? The kind that mattered, maybe. The voices grew clearer. Boots tapped metal. Someone snorted, the way people do when they think a new target is waiting to be found. Riven's mind had always turned toward solutions, angles, exits. He nodded once toward the shadowed stair. "We can cut across the coolant line and take the catwalk. My place is 5 minutes if we move now." Emberline studied him. Her gaze was not a threat. It was a measure, a weighing of risk against hope. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because once," Riven said, "someone helped me before I had the right words to ask." Pulse tugged Emberline's wing. "Boots," the hatchling whispered, and that decided the moment. Emberline gathered her young close. "We will not take charity," she said, voice steady, "but we will accept a job if you have one. Then it's work, Riven replied. And tea. Can't have work without tea. He smiled at Pulse and Lilt. Deal? They moved. Riven led with an easy speed, reading the city's seams, hissing vents, swinging cables, that one panel that always rattled 2 beats late. Emberline followed, keeping the hatchlings between her wings and the rail. A guard's flashlight swept the alley behind them and painted the wall where they had been. The beam slid off into darkness, and the boots carried on without interest. The city missed them by inches. Riven's building had been a packaging warehouse in a better decade. He had made the upper level livable with honest tools and borrowed ideas. Inside, the air held the warm, comforting mix of solder, old books, and ginger. He clicked a kettle on and turned heaters toward a corner he hadn't used in months. This can be your space, he said. We'll add heat stones tomorrow. Emberline's shoulders eased a little. Pulse climbed onto a low stool and stared at Riven's Mayo arm with open wonder. Does it feel things? The hatchling asked. Riven flexed the fingers and let the soft actuators hum. Not the way skin does, he said, but enough to know when something needs gentle. Lilt looked around the room and spotted a small paper crane perched on a shelf, something Riven had folded on a slow night and forgotten. Do you make birds? Lilt asked, voice a hush of delight. Sometimes, Riven said, and the kettle clicked ready as if it too had been listening. He set tea, brought out fresh noodles from Nona Vale's stall downstairs, and found a jar of calcium chews he kept for his own bones. These might help your horn, he told Pulse. If your mama says yes. Emberline bowed her head, a simple gesture that meant more than thanks. You will have our work, she said, and our effort, for as long as your doors are open. Riven nodded, the promise settling into the room like another small, warm light. Outside, Iron Harbor sang its neon lullaby, and the boots moved on to find a different story. Inside, a new one began with steam, careful bites, and the quiet courage of choosing a way forward together. Morning arrived in Iron Harbor as a brighter shade of dusk. Riven took Emberline and the hatchlings to Kesh and Coil, a workshop stitched together from 3 old bays and 1,000 stubborn choices. Boss Torvald Kesh, who had hands like hydraulic clamps and a laugh like a stalled fan, was elbow deep in a hover van and swearing gently at a stripped bolt. Boss, Riven said, I've got candidates. Kesh peered out. He raised an eyebrow at Emberline, then at Pulse and Lilt. Candidates, he repeated, as if tasting the word. Candidates who can reach the spots my shoulders can't? Candidates who hear faults before scanners do? Riven said. Kesh grunted. Show me. The test was simple. A bench stacked with engines that all rattled in slightly different, wrong ways. Customers had called them cursed. Emberline bent close and listened, her head tilted as if the sound came not from the metal, but from a field around the metal. This one hums off pitch, she said. There she took a UV lamp Riven handed her, and the hairline blaze lit up like a thread of frost. The fix took 5 minutes and saved a courier from a mid-route stall. Kesh tried not to look impressed. Lucky guess, he muttered. Pulse and Lilt stood on small crates and sorted micro-fasteners into bins by size and finish. Lilt could tell torque rating by weight alone. Pulse learned part numbers like melodies and sang them softly while working. Riven watched their hands grow steadier each hour, watched Emberline's shoulders loosen as skill found purpose. Not everyone liked what they saw. One customer folded his arms and refused to let Emberline touch his bike. No offense, he said, meaning offense, but I prefer human hands. Then you're in luck, Riven said mildly, because I'm human and the human hands you prefer say Emberline is the best tech for this job. The customer left in a huff. An hour later, a courier twin named Mina rolled in, breathless, her sister Doro right B. "Who fixed the Violet Fault van?" Mina asked. Emberline lifted a hand. Mina grinned. "You saved our run, and probably our jobs. I brought tea tokens. And this." She set a small foil packet on the counter. "Sticky buns from Nona Vale. They're somehow both crispy and soft. Like a miracle." News travels faster than sound in a city of small margins. Within days, those who valued results more than rumor started bringing their machines to Kesh and Coil. A luxury hauler with wild power dips arrived with a driver who looked like they slept in 3 meetings at once. Emberline listened, then traced the surge to a micro swirl in the power braid. She adjusted the routing and taught Riven a simpler test for future checks. The driver paid well and left word with a friend. Attention has a way of calling its cousins. A group of rich kids arrived with a stolen racer, painted in colors that hurt the air. The loudest one leaned on the counter, as if it owed him money. "Mod this," he said, "and keep your questions to yourself." "We don't touch what isn't yours," Riven replied. "Then we touch your license," the kid sneered. "And your new pet project." Kesh wasn't in. Riven stood very still and let the quiet make space around his words. "You brought a problem into a shop that fixes problems. Here's your fix. Take your racer and go." The kid reached for the racer's control rod. Riven set 2 fingers of his Mayo hand on the frame. The prosthetic hummed, gentle as a lullaby, and the frame flexed just enough to stand up to the kid's tug. "The exit's behind you," Riven said. "I believe in good work, fair pay, and doors that stay open. I don't believe in helping theft." They left muttering. The twins watched from the side lift. "You didn't even raise your voice," Doro said, admiration wrapped in relief. "No need," Riven replied. "Raising a voice is for when a whisper didn't listen." In the following days, the workshop shifted in tiny but real ways. Fenray, a supplier with a soft spot for lost causes and a backpack full of spare miracles, started swinging by with clean alloy and discounted seals. Nona Vale sent hot soup on rainy afternoons for whoever's hands are cold. Emberline began drafting small modifications for tools, handles that fit better in clawed grip, torque garbs that saved wrists from overwork. Kesh called it fancy nonsense, while quietly installing them at every station. Still, clouds gathered. A sleek sedan eased to the curb one late evening. The driver wore patience like a coat. He introduced himself with a card as Slate Varro of Fulgore Consortium. "We admire what you've built here," Slate said, voice smooth and even. "Fulgore can amplify it. Buyout, premium. You keep a roll. We streamline the rest." "The rest," Riven said, "being our staff. We retain certain personnel," Slate replied. Other Emberline's tail tip flicked once. "Placed," she repeated, each letter weighed. "We're fine without Fulgore," Kesh said, finally using his whole laugh like a hammer. "Doors that way." Slate's smile thinned. "Consider the price of stubbornness," he said, then left a scent of expensive rain. The day after, 2 shipments of parts went missing in transit. The next, an inspector found a violation the shop had never had, for a rule no one could find written down. One night, a rattle of glass and the smell of smoke shook Riven from sleep. Flames climbed a storage rack fast, hungry and bright. "Waterline's dead," Kesh coughed, hauling a can. Emberline shaped air with her wings, starving the fire long enough for Riven to kick the manual pump. Pulse and Lilt gathered drawings and the box of spare chips. Mina and Doro formed a bucket chain with neighbors who didn't ask questions before help. They saved most of it, Not because the city cared, but because people did. The mess left behind looked like a map of the fight ahead. Kesh leaned on a stool, gray in his beard, darker with soot. "They want us to bend," he said. "Maybe we should," Riven answered, thinking not of surrender, but of angles, about stress and how a curve holds more than a straight line. He picked up the old metal box that had fallen from a shelf during the scramble. Inside, a thin folder lay scorched at the edges. Pulse carried it over, eyes bright with curiosity. "What is it?" Riven opened the folder and found time looking back. Service records from his field years, a parchment certificate he had never displayed, and a note sealed in wax he had once been too proud to read twice. The certificate named him ally to the Draconid Commons for refusing an order that would have burned the wrong people. "I thought this meant nothing now," he said quietly. ... Emberline took in the seal, the sigils, the old ink. Her gaze lifted with a new focus, the way it did when she heard a fault inside a machine that others missed. "It means everything," she whispered, "and it might be our key." Morning brought the kind of clarity that rides in with tired bones and tea. Emberline slid a datapad across the table and pointed to a clause most people never notice. "The Draconid Commons may register cooperative craft enclaves with allied sponsors." She read, "Sponsors can certify skilled apprentices and protect workplaces from predatory interference, provided the enclave serves the public at fair rates." Her voice warmed. "Your certificate lets you sponsor me, and once I'm in, I can vouch others." Riven felt something rearrange inside his chest, a click that felt like a part finally seated true. "We can make this place a shelter," he said, legally. "Not a secret, but a promise with paperwork." Kesh snorted. "Paperwork is just bolts made of words," he said. "Tighten them right, and the structure holds." The next days became a montage of signing, stamping, and standing in lines that made no sense until they did. Nona Vale watched the stall, while Mina and Doro ran documents across 3 districts. Fenray found a notary tucked behind a hydroponic basil wall. Pulse and Lilt practiced greeting customers with "Welcome to the Enclave," and kept forgetting the last word because it tasted new. Fulgor noticed. Slate Vero returned with the same careful smile, and a small notice pinged 3 terminals at once, and a banner on the city's public board added a new line. Hallie and Emberline Cooperative Works, certified service for all. It looked like 3 words, but in Iron Harbor, it read like a gate opening. Slate arrived within the hour, temper now showing at the edges like threads pulled from a suit. "You think this protects you," he said. "No," Riven answered. "We think it protects the people who come here. The rest is a side effect." Slate set a neat stack of papers on the counter. "Formal complaint," he said. "Expect inspections, audits, and a long winter." Emberline placed her palm on the counter. "We know winter," she said softly. "We've learned how to make warmth." The winter arrived quickly. Supplies delayed without reason, then replaced by parts that cracked under stress. The team tested everything twice. Inspectors came with clipboards and frowns. They left with tea and a grudging understanding that the shop's bolts, word bolts and metal ones, were tight. Clients increased anyway because word traveled faster than pressure. A choir from down district brought a bus with a failing stabilizer and paid in songs and baked rolls. A gardener's co-op limped in on a worn-out hauler. They left with a gentler machine and promised to plant herbs in the narrow strip by the shop door. Still, lines frayed. One night, the power flickered, then died. The grid cut to a whisper. Riven's myoarm switched to battery with a soft chime. They lit work lamps and finished a repair anyway. Emberline's shadow moved along the wall like a second set of wings. "You should be scared," Slate told Riven later, under a dull gray noon. "We can press until the walls bend." "Walls bend," Riven said. "That's what keeps them from breaking." The push turned rough. A van with no plates idled near closing. 4 figures stepped out with the slow confidence of people who rent fear by the hour. Riven had expected them. He had changed the door sweeps, added emergency latches, and reinforced the hinge pins. Kesh had organized a neighbor watch who walked dogs at very convenient times. Mina and Doro had timed courier rounds to align with closing. The first figure reached for a lock bar. A future barking dog appeared. Doro came around the corner at speed, singing into a comm about an incredibly boring delivery, nothing at all suspicious, while 7 neighbors stepped from shadows with their own phones already recording. Emberline stood with the posture of someone who has no interest in performance, only in presence. Pulse and Lilt were not in sight. They had practiced where to go when the city turned unkind. The figures left with less slowness than they had arrived. Slate did not return that week. The week after, Fen Ray brought good news tucked in a box of copper washers, a small grant for community training labs. The team turned a corner of the shop into a learning space with benches sized for small hands, magnifiers that made tiny parts look like worlds, and a sign that read, "Try, learn, try again." Emberline taught listening, the way a healthy engine sings, the way a failing one tells you exactly where it hurts. Riven taught gentle force and when not to use it. Kesh taught the art of steady, which he claimed was more rare than clever. Mina and Doro taught fast documentation and slower, kinder patience with people new to forms. Nona Vale taught tea that tasted like rest and how to accept a second cup without apologizing. Days layered like careful welds, the enclave earned a rhythm. Greeting bells, tool music, small wins. Yet the story kept a tight line of tension because Iron Harbor never promised ease, only the chance to build something stronger than the push against it. On a late afternoon, washed in warm gray, Pulse found Riven on the back step, polishing a set of MyoArm contact pins. "Uncle Riven," Pulse said, the title having slipped into the shop like sunlight and never left. "When will it feel like we are safe forever?" Riven looked at the little horn nub where the crack had healed into a pale thread. "Forever is a big word," he said, "but I think we built a door that won't slam shut, and we have lots of hands to hold it open." Pulse nodded solemnly. "Many hands," the hatchling said, and ran in to help Lilt sort a new box of parts by tone, tapping each against a tuning bar until it sang the right bin's name. The notice about their first community fair arrived that evening. Stalls, music, tool demos, and a quiet ceremony to mark the enclave's official standing. The choir would sing. The gardeners would bring herbs. Nona Vale promised a pot of broth big enough to convince Rain to sit and listen. Riven read the schedule and felt the story bend toward something soft and brave. Slate Varro read it too. A last card slid from his sleeve, edges sharp. The fair would not pass without a test. The fair day broke with a sky the color of brushed steel. Strings of little lights looped from bay door to street sign. Children drew chalk gears on the pavement and handed out paper birds folded by Lilt. Pulse tested a small glider in the alley, its wings catching air like laughter. The choir warmed up with notes that made the old windows hum in sympathy. Riven walked the line of booths, checking bolts and ties, a habit he could not quiet. Emberline joined him, her wingtips grazing the air. "Today," she said, "we build memory." "And maybe fix 24 engines," he replied. But yes, memory. The opening hour glowed. Kesh told stories about stubborn bolts that taught him patience. Mina and Doro ran a speed dock table where forms felt less like traps and more like maps. Fenray sold spare miracles at cost. Nona Vale's broth anchored the lane with a warm, savory promise. The gardeners tucked basil and mint into planters by the door, because doors deserve welcome too. Slate Varro arrived without ceremony. He wore a coat that repelled rain and glances. Behind him, a crew of contractors milled with practiced aimlessness. Riven saw them, as did half the street. Neighbors adjusted their routes. The choir shifted sets, choosing songs that carried better and gathered crowd weight where it was most useful, between the shop and the ones who might want to bruise it. Slate stopped at the edge of the lane. "You have what you want," he said softly, almost kindly, "but it can still be taken. A cracked support, a delayed permit, a missing line in a registry. Small things become big when you lean on them." Riven held his gaze. "We've learned to spread weight," he said. "No single point carries this." Emberline stepped forward, not as a shield, but as a presence. "We are a cooperative," she said. "It means the word we is stronger here than anywhere else in this district." Slate's smile appeared and disappeared like a glitch. "We'll see," he said. He nodded at the contractors. The move was subtle enough to deny if anyone wrote it down. A bumped cable, a loosened tie, a whisper that the city had ordered the lane cleared. 3 stalls shifted, a banner sagged, a generator hiccuped. For a tense breath, the fair leaned the wrong way. Then the neighborhood leaned back. The courier twins rerouted foot traffic with a joke and 2 bright flags. Kesh hammered a pin into place with the authority of 50 years. Fenray produced a spare cable from a pocket that should not have held it. The gardeners tied fast knots like they had been tying things down against wind their whole lives. The choir lifted a song that had carried people through worse storms than this one. Emberline raised her head and spoke to the crowd in simple words about how a machine stays steady when the road shakes. Slate watched as the stall line straightened and the banner rose. His face smoothed into polite indifference. He tapped his comm. The contractors vanished like a bad idea at sunrise. "You think you won," he told Riven. "Last try wrapped in quiet." "We think we belong," Riven answered. "The rest is noise." The fair continued as if it had always known it would. People learned, traded, ate, and laughed. Kids asked questions that sounded like invention. Pulse and Lilt ran the try, learn, try again bench with the seriousness of surgeons. Emberline taught a small class on listening to engines, and half the parents stayed to listen too, surprised by the calm that comes when sound turns into meaning. Near dusk, the city pulled a lovely trick and tinted the clouds with rose. Lanterns lit, warm and steady. Riven stood under the bay door and looked across a crowd that had once been strangers. The final demonstration on the schedule belonged to Pulse and Lilt, a tiny glider fashioned from scrap and patience, with a belly sized for 2 small dreamers. Riven had helped shape the safety line so the glider could never fall far. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Pulse said. "And more than ready," Lilt added, smile bright. They launched. The little craft found a pocket of air and rode it like a promise, dipping and rising, tether bright as thread in sunlight. The crowd cheered as if something enormous had taken place, because something had. Proof, in miniature, that lift exists when design meets courage. Emberline's eyes shone. "Do you see it?" she asked Riven, voice close to wonder. "I do," he said. "I see a future that holds." The choir gathered for the closing song. Nona Vale ladled the last bowls with a flourish. Kesh leaned on a Fenray counted washers in the exact middle of the lane, so someone would have to say hello. Riven spoke a few words into a slightly scratchy mic. He said thank you, and he meant it in the largest sense, the kind that includes everyone who ever straightened a crooked thing. He said the shop would keep its doors soft on the hinges and firm on the frame. He said beginners were welcome, and so were experts, because both had something to teach. He said the tea kettle would be ready a little before opening, because mornings are easier when there's a place that expects you. Emberline added only this: we came here looking for scraps and found a table. If you ever need a seat, we will pull one out for you. It was not poetry, but it felt like it. The night settled. People drifted home with tools, herbs, and songs stuck in their heads. Pulse and Lilt fell asleep on a bench under a coat that smelled faintly of solder and cinnamon. Riven and Emberline stood under the sign, letters hand-painted and a little imperfect. Hallie and Emberline Cooperative Works. Any regrets? Emberline asked. Only that we didn't hang this sign sooner, Riven said. She touched her wing gently to his shoulder, a gesture of deep care in a culture that understands how thin the world can feel sometimes. We made a promise, she said, to keep a door open, and to make the hinges quiet, Riven added, smiling. And to make the hinges quiet, she echoed, smiling back. A customer rolled up right then with a hover cart that sighed like it had opinions. Riven cracked his knuckles, flesh and mayo, out of habit, then laughed at himself. Come on, he said, family business. They went to work, not because the fight was over, but because belonging is a practice. They patched lines, shared warmth, and turned broken into better. And when the lights of Iron Harbor traced their bright rain down steel bones, the shop glowed back, steady, open, a simple promise kept. In the end, it hadn't been about winning. It had been about choosing. About a tired tech who reached out a hand, a dragon mother who chose trust, two small inventors who loved a good glider, and a neighborhood that decided no one should fix their life alone. It all began with 5 quiet words in a hard city. Come with me. You're safe. It grew into a door that never slammed, and it lasted because home isn't a place you stumble upon. It's the promise you keep, over and over, together.